The snow began falling in Pinewood, Montana on the afternoon of December 20th, 1999, and by Christmas Eve, the small mountain town had been swallowed by a white silence so profound it felt like the rest of the world had ceased to exist. Pinewood was the sort of community that existed as a sanctuary, a place where the population of 300 people operated on a currency of trust and unlocked doors. Nestled deep in the western mountains, it was a living postcard, particularly in December when the Victorian street lamps on Main Street were wrapped in spruce garlands and the air smelled perpetually of wood smoke and pine. But the tragedy of Pinewood is not just about a crime. It is about how the very things that made the town idyllic, the traditions, the trust, the open doors, were weaponized against a family in a way that would leave a scar on the collective psyche of the region for a generation. This is the story of the Wilson family and how a single moment of holiday magic was twisted into an 11-year nightmare. Sarah and Michael Wilson had built a life that was enviable in its simplicity. They lived in a sprawling 2-story blue Victorian on Maple Street, a home that Michael, a high school math teacher and former football star, had spent years renovating with his own hands. Sarah, a teacher's aide with a gentle demeanor that made her beloved by the district's elementary students, was the emotional anchor of the home. Together they were raising 2 daughters, 9-year-old Sophie, a serious and protective older sister, and 6-year-old Emma. Emma was the vibrant spark of the family, a child described by everyone who knew her as possessing a gravitational pull of joy. She had cascading light brown curls, bright green eyes that seemed to miss nothing, and a gap-toothed smile that she flashed at anyone willing to make eye contact. The Wilsons were creatures of habit, bound together by rituals like Saturday morning pancakes and Friday movie nights, but no tradition was more sacred to them or to the town of Pinewood than Christmas. That year, the holiday season had an undercurrent of melancholy for the Wilsons. Just days prior, on December 20th, they had bid farewell to their closest friends, Robert and Catherine Foster. The couples had been inseparable for 5 years, bonding over church potlucks and shared struggles. The Fosters, unable to conceive children of their own, had poured their affection into the Wilson girls. Catherine, in particular, had a fierce, almost maternal attachment to Emma, often holding her on her lap for hours during visits. When Robert landed a promotion selling medical equipment in Missoula, a city 150 miles west, the goodbye was tearful. Catherine had wept openly, hugging Emma so tightly that Sarah had to gently intervene. Oh yeah, they promised to visit, waving until the moving truck disappeared around the bend, leaving a void in the Wilson social circle, just as the heavy snows began to fall. Christmas Day, however, dawned with a pristine perfection that seemed to wash away the sadness. The morning was a flurry of torn wrapping paper and excited shrieks. Sophie was ecstatic over a new bicycle helmet, while Emma cradled a lifelike baby doll that cried real tears. The house was warm, smelling of roasting turkey and cinnamon, insulated from the biting wind outside. As evening approached, the atmosphere shifted to one of anticipation. In Pinewood, there was a specific local tradition that the children cherished above all else. Tom Harrison, a 52-year-old retired postal worker who lived 3 doors down, would don a high-quality Santa suit and walk the length of Maple Street. He had done this for a decade, ever since his wife passed away, finding purpose in the joy of the neighborhood children. He would ring doorbells and hand out candy canes, a benevolent figure in the winter dark. Or, by 7 p.m. the sun had long set, and the streetlights cast long, amber shadows across the snowdrifts. Inside the Wilson home, the family was gathering for their final tradition, opening one last gift before dinner. The stereo was playing Bing Crosby, the volume low and comforting. Emma, clad in pajamas printed with candy canes and wearing fuzzy socks, had been keeping a vigil by the front window since 6:30 p.m., her breath fogging the glass as she scanned the street for the flash of a red suit. When Michael called the family to the tree, Emma reluctantly left her post. Michael handed Sophie a silver-wrapped box containing knee pads to match her helmet, and the room filled with laughter. Then he handed Emma a green box tied with a gold ribbon. The moment Emma's fingers touched the ribbon, the doorbell rang. The sound was sharp, cutting through the music. The change in Emma was instantaneous. She dropped the box, her eyes widening with a mixture of disbelief and pure, unadulterated thrill. "It's Mr. Harrison, it's Santa," she squealed. Before Sarah or Michael could rise, before they could offer a cautionary word or even smile at her enthusiasm, Emma scrambled up. Her fuzzy socks slipped slightly on the hardwood as she sprinted toward the hallway. Sarah chuckled, calling out, "Emma, wait, invite him in for cocoa." But she remained on the couch for a beat, savoring her daughter's happiness. She heard the front door unlock. She heard the hinges creak. She heard the wind howl as the pressure changed in the house. And then she heard Emma's voice, clear and trembling with delight. "Oh, Santa Claus." That was the last time Sarah Wilson would hear her daughter's voice for 4,018 days. Following that exclamation, there was only silence. It wasn't the silence of a pause. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that felt wrong. Sarah's smile faltered. She stood up, smoothing her sweater, and walked toward the hallway. "Emma, honey!" The distance from the living room to the front door was perhaps 20 feet. It took Sarah maybe 15 seconds to cover it. When she turned the corner into the foyer, a blast of freezing air hit her face. The heavy oak door was standing wide open, banging softly against the interior wall. Snow was swirling into the house, melting on the floorboards. The porch was empty. Sarah stepped out, the cold biting through her thin indoor clothes. She looked left, toward the driveway. She looked right, down the street where the other houses glowed with festive lights. "Emma!" she called out, her voice calm at first, expecting a prank. Silence returned. No footprints marred the fresh layer of snow on the porch steps, suggesting whoever had been there had stayed on the cleared walkway, or the wind was covering their tracks instantly. Panic began to prickle at the base of Sarah's neck. She ran back inside. "Michael, she's not there." Michael emerged from the living room, confused. "What do you mean?" She just opened the door. "The door is open. She's gone. There's no one there." The next 10 minutes were a descent into madness. Michael sprinted into the yard, screaming Emma's name until his throat was raw. He ran to the street, spinning in circles, looking for tire tracks, footprints, a fleeing figure, anything. Sarah tore through the house, ripping open closets, looking under beds, praying. This was a game of hide-and-seek gone wrong. Sophie sat frozen by the Christmas tree, the silver wrapping paper clutched in her hand, watching her parents disintegrate. By the time Michael dialed 911, his hands were shaking so violently he dropped the phone twice. The operator heard a man on the verge of collapse. "My daughter, someone took her? She opened the door for Santa and she's gone." The police response was swift. Chief Daniel Crawford, a man who had known the Wilsons for years, arrived with 2 patrol cars within minutes. The timeline was established quickly. The doorbell rang. Emma ran. She spoke 3 words, and 30 seconds later, she was vanished. The immediate suspicion fell on the only person known to be walking the streets in a Santa suit, Tom Harrison. Officers were dispatched to Harrison's home immediately. They found him 3 doors down, preparing to leave his house. He was wearing the red suit. He was holding a bag of candy canes. To the police, it looked like they had caught the perpetrator red-handed. They brought him in for questioning, leaving his front door unguarded as rumors began to spread through the neighborhood like a virus. However, the interrogation of Tom Harrison revealed a different, more complicated reality. Tom was bewildered, terrified, and heartbroken. He explained that he hadn't even started his rounds yet. He had been delayed by a phone call from his daughter in Seattle and was just stepping out when he saw the police lights at the Wilson house. He had walked toward the commotion to help, only to be arrested. The police grilled him for hours. They checked his home, tearing up floorboards and emptying his freezer. They checked his phone records. They canvassed the neighbors. The timeline Tom provided was airtight. He had been on the phone with his daughter until minutes before the police arrived. Multiple neighbors confirmed they hadn't seen Tom's Santa figure on the street prior to the police arrival. Tom Harrison was innocent, but in the court of public opinion, his innocence was irrelevant. The town needed a monster to blame for the theft of a child on Christmas, and the man who lived alone and owned a Santa suit fit the mold. Even after he was released, the harassment was relentless. Bricks were thrown through his windows. Child killer was spray-painted on his driveway. Broken by the suspicion and the guilt of a crime he didn't commit, Tom eventually fled Pinewood, moving to Seattle to die in obscurity, another victim of that night. With Tom cleared by law enforcement, the investigation hit a wall of ice. The FBI was brought in, helicopters with thermal imaging scanned the mountains, and search parties combed every inch of the forest. But the blizzard was relentless, covering any physical evidence that might have existed. There were no tire tracks to cast, no fibers to analyze. It was as if a ghost had stepped out of the storm, swallowed Emma, and dissolved back into the wind. The years that followed were a slow-motion torture for Sarah and Michael. The grief of a missing child is not a sharp, sudden pain. It is a chronic illness. It eroded their marriage. Michael coped by trying to move forward, burying himself in his work, needing to believe that life had to continue for Sophie's sake. Sarah, however, could not let go. She froze Emma's room in time. The bed remained unmade. The half-open present sat in the corner, a layer of dust settling on the life that used to be. Well, they stopped celebrating Christmas. The tree would never go up again. Sophie, growing up in the shadow of a ghost, learned to make herself small, to not add to her parents' burden. She eventually left for college, escaping a house that felt more like a mausoleum than a home. But Sarah never stopped looking. She started a support group. She age-progressed photos of Emma and mailed them to police stations across the country. She badgered the FBI for updates on a file that had long since gone cold. She held on to a belief that defied logic, that Emma was alive and that she was waiting. 150 miles away, in the bustling college town of Missoula, a girl named Emma Foster was living a life built on a bedrock of lies. Emma Foster knew she was different, though she couldn't articulate why. She had been raised by Robert and Catherine Foster, two people she called Mom and Dad, in a home that was suffocatingly protective. She was homeschooled until the 8th grade, kept away from the prying eyes of the community. Catherine told her it was because she had a weak immune system, because the world was dangerous, because people couldn't be trusted. Emma was a quiet, obedient child, her natural spark dimmed by years of isolation. She had vague, dreamlike memories of a different life. A blue house, the smell of pancakes, a sister, but Catherine dismissed them as fantasies or dreams from a fever she had as a baby. The Fosters were meticulous. They had forged a birth certificate. They had moved to a new neighborhood in Missoula where no one knew their history of infertility. To the outside world, they were a slightly reclusive but normal family. Robert went to work selling medical supplies. Catherine stayed home, guarding her stolen prize. They had justified the kidnapping to themselves with a twisted logic. The Wilsons had 2 daughters, and they had none. They convinced themselves they could love Emma more, protect her better. They believed that because they hadn't hurt her, because they fed and clothed and schooled her. They weren't criminals. They were saving her. But cracks appear in even the most carefully constructed facades. As Emma entered her teenage years, the Fosters allowed her to attend high school, fearing that continued isolation would draw more suspicion than integration. Emma was socially awkward, anxious, and deeply lonely, but she was intelligent. She began to notice the way Catherine panicked if she was 5 minutes late. She noticed the way Robert turned off the news whenever stories about missing children aired. The unravelling began on December 25, 2010, exactly 11 years to the day since the abduction. Emma, now 17, needed a physical for a school field trip. Her regular doctor was unavailable, so she was seen by Dr. Jennifer Martinez at the Missoula Community Hospital. Dr. Martinez was a veteran pediatrician with an instinct for the unspoken. When she entered the exam room, she sensed the tension immediately. Catherine Foster was hovering, answering questions for Emma, her hand resting possessively on the girl's shoulder. Dr. Martinez, citing hospital policy for teenagers, politely but firmly asked Catherine to wait in the lobby. Catherine hesitated, a flash of fear in her eyes, but complied to avoid a scene. Alone with the doctor, Emma was polite but guarded. As Dr. Martinez performed the routine checkup, she asked Emma to lower her hospital gown to check her spine. There, on Emma's left shoulder blade, was a birthmark. It was distinctive, a dark brown pigmentation shaped unmistakably like a butterfly with one wing slightly larger than the other. Dr. Martinez froze. 6 years prior, she had attended a medical conference on identifying victims of long-term abduction. The keynote speaker had been Agent Karen Hayes, the lead FBI agent on the Emma Wilson case. Hayes had projected a photo of that specific butterfly birthmark onto a 20-foot screen, urging doctors to memorize it. This child is growing up somewhere," Hayes had said. "She will need a doctor eventually. You are our last line of defense." Dr. Martinez finished the exam with trembling hands. Forcing herself to keep her voice steady, she told Emma to get dressed. She walked out to the nurse's station, bypassed the reception desk, went into her private office and locked the door. She called the local police, who immediately patched her through to the FBI field office. "I have a patient," Dr. Martinez whispered, clutching the phone. Her name is Emma Foster. She is 17 years old. She has the butterfly birthmark. "I think I've found Emma Wilson." The response was massive and silent. Plainclothes officers flooded the hospital waiting room within 15 minutes. They identified Catherine Foster sitting in a chair, flipping through a magazine, oblivious that her world was ending. When Dr. Martinez called Catherine and Emma back into the hallway, allegedly to sign discharge papers, the trap snapped shut. 2 agents approached. "Catherine Foster?" one asked. "Yes." Catherine stood up, smiling uncertainly. "You are under arrest for the kidnapping of Emma Wilson." The scene that followed was chaotic. Catherine screamed, trying to reach for Emma. Emma recoiled, confusion and terror washing over her. "Mum, what's happening?" she cried. The agents separated them immediately. Catherine was handcuffed and led away, shouting that she loved Emma, that she was her mother. Emma was taken to a secure room, shaking uncontrollably. Agent Hayes, now 11 years older and greying at the temples, arrived by helicopter an hour later. She sat across from the terrified teenager and placed a photograph on the table. It was an age progression image of Emma Wilson, alongside a photo of Emma at age 6. "Emma," Agent Hayes said softly, "I know this is scary, but the people you know as your parents are not who they say they are. Your name is Emma Wilson. You were taken from your home in Pinewood on Christmas night in 1999. "No," Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face. "That's not true. My dad is Robert. We live on Oak Street." "Do you remember a blue house?" Hayes asked gently. "Do you remember a sister named Sophie? Do you remember pancakes on Saturday mornings?" The specific detail, pancakes, hit Emma like a physical blow. The memory, long suppressed, surged to the surface. The smell of batter, the sound of a man's laughter, the feeling of a sister braiding her hair. The facade of the last 11 years shattered. She looked at the agent, her lip trembling. I remember the Santa suit." "Tell me," Hayes said. "My dad, Robert, he has a Santa suit. He keeps it in the basement. He told me never to touch it." The confirmation sealed the fate of the Fosters. Robert was arrested at his office an hour later. A search of the Foster home revealed the damning evidence. The Santa suit, still stained with salt from the roads of Pinewood 11 years ago, and a journal Catherine had kept detailing the stalking of the Wilson family and the planning of the abduction. They had preyed on the neighborhood tradition, knowing that a child in Pinewood would open the door for Santa without hesitation. Robert had stood on that porch, rung the bell, and when Emma opened the door, he had snatched her, covered her mouth, and vanished into the storm before the music inside had even finished playing. Back in Pinewood, the phone rang in the Wilson kitchen. It was a landline that Sarah had refused to disconnect for a decade, just in case. When she heard Agent Hayes' voice, she fell to her knees. Michael found her there, unable to speak, clutching the receiver. They didn't need words. They knew. The drive to Missoula took 2 hours, but it felt like a lifetime. Sophie flew in from Seattle. The reunion took place in a private room at the hospital. When Sarah walked in, she stopped. She saw a young woman who looked like a stranger, yet possessed the eyes of the child she had lost. There was no cinematic run into each other's arms. There was a hesitation, a heavy, air-filled pause where the weight of the lost years hung between them. Then Sarah stepped forward. "Emma!" Emma looked at this woman, this stranger, who had aged 10 years in her grief. "Mom." She tested the word. It felt foreign, yet right. Sarah collapsed into her daughter, and the dam broke. Michael joined them, wrapping his arms around the two women who defined his existence. For the first time in 11 years, the Wilson family was in one room. The silence that had haunted them was replaced by the sound of weeping, but this time it was the weeping of release. The aftermath was a long, arduous road. The trial of Robert and Catherine Foster was swift. The evidence was overwhelming. They were sentenced to life in prison for kidnapping and child endangerment. The judge called their crime a theft of time, noting that while they hadn't physically beaten Emma, they had murdered her childhood and tortured a family. Tom Harrison was formally exonerated. The town of Pinewood, shamed by its treatment of him, issued a public apology. A scholarship fund was started in his name. Tom never moved back, but he sent a letter to Emma, expressing his joy that she was safe. Emma Wilson moved back to Pinewood. It wasn't easy. She had to mourn the loss of the parents she had loved, even if they were her captors, a complex psychological trauma known as Stockholm Syndrome that required years of therapy to untangle. She had to get to know her biological family again. She had to learn how to be a sister to Sophie, how to be a daughter to Sarah and Michael. But slowly, the rhythms of life returned. The Wilsons started celebrating Christmas again, though they never allowed a Santa Claus to come to the door. They found new traditions. Emma eventually went to college, studying psychology to help other victims of trauma. The blue house on Maple Street, once a monument to grief, became a home again. And every year, on the anniversary of her return, the Wilsons would sit down to dinner, not to mourn what was lost, but to marvel at the impossible resilience of hope. They had learned the hardest lesson of all, that evil can wear a friendly face, that time can be stolen, to remember that the truth, like a birthmark hidden beneath the skin, is indelible and will always, eventually come to light.